Last time, we created an artifact registry in Google Cloud. We configured it with workload identity federation, which is a tongue twister. Um, so we can push Docker images into it securely. This time, we'll see if we can use AI tools to actually build code and GitHub Actions so we can push it into that repository. So this is episode 2. So today's goal is to create a starter kit for Python developers to work locally, create a simple pipeline so we can test their code, build it, and push the image into Google Artifact Repository. Um, there is more to Docker, so let's talk about Docker for a little bit because I think Docker is sometimes underutilized. Um, I like to create 3 different images from the same piece of code. I like to create a development image, and that will allow the developers to run things on their machine. And that image will probably not copy all the code inside of it. It will leave the code outside. It will depend on a Docker run or a Docker compose command with volume mapping, so you can connect your code into the image live, and it will also not be a minimal Linux image. It will be probably an elaborate image that has some debugging tools that you may need. I also like to create a test image because test images give me the flexibility of running everything I need in a test phase in GitHub Actions or even locally on my machine without having to install a whole lot of things. And then finally, there is the image that everybody talks about, I feel or I find, and everybody talks about the production image where you run copy app into dot or copy source and build, then you minimize and you harden the image and you run it on the nano Linux server so you can get the best deployment time and all that jazz. So, why do I like to do that? First, I think there is great value in unifying the developer machine configuration. It is very useful specifically if we are using things like npm or where you have to manage multiple node versions, or you go into Java JDK and SDK, and or you go into Python environments. It is really complex. I actually have a couple of LinkedIn articles on how to build Dockerized Java Spark and Java and React and Node.js. I have a couple of repositories that show you how to do exactly just that. So there is great value in doing that. Also, Docker Compose allows you to run different front end and back end components together. So you can run the full stack. So you can run your back end in Java, and you can run your front end in Next.js, or so you can build React components and you can modify your back end Java at the same time, or Python, and you have access to all the source code. It also allows you to run local databases if you need it. So you don't have to install a developer database. You also can run the same database as you're probably running in pre-prod or in your cloud dev environment. And it also allows you to connect to your network resources, and if you have like the right proper Docker Compose files. So if your app or if your code connects to remote resources that are on the network outside of your machine as well. And finally, I feel with all that, and then if you add all the environment variables required, because now your code needs to use environment variables, and the environment variables will be passed into your code. So your developer starts to learn more about how things run in production. And I feel this brings our dev teams closer to our production environment, and it educates them a little bit on our secrets and how we pass them. It is one step removed still, maybe from when you're running Kubernetes, because it doesn't have the service definitions and all the jazz, but it really is very close. So, to create a Dockerized starter project, I started Aider.Chat. First thing I realized, Aider said, "Oh, I got a new version." I'm like, "Okay, okay, good. It's updating itself." So it updated. That went well. And then I asked it to create the starter project. It created correct source directory, tree structures. It put a roots. I asked it for a Flask project, so it created a separate roots folder, a separate test folder. That was pretty good. Git ignore is still your responsibility, as we mentioned before. I prompted it to create a div Docker file. It did not work very well. It still tried to copy the files. So I remembered my advice from last video, and I was very specific. And I was like, create a Docker file.dev that runs a Flask server but does not copy the files into the image. Instead, mapping them as an external volume so that when the files change, the Docker image restarts automatically. And guess what? Nagging works. If you tell them exactly what you need, it works. I think I remember once somebody said, this whole prompt engineering maybe gives rise to a form of literature or writing that we stopped teaching in universities called expository writing. And for somebody like me, again, who's English a second language, it is not easy, but I am getting the hang of it. The other thing is refactoring on the Docker images worked really well because after I created the Docker image, I realized two things. One, it was creating the default version 3.9 Python. So I probably could have specified the Python version in my original prompt, but refactoring, this is where Aider comes to help you. Refactoring works. The second thing is I didn't specify the port. It went with the default port 5000. But if you're on a Mac, thank you AirPlay and Monterey since like, I don't know, a few years, port 5000 is taken. That used to be DB2 port for those of you old enough to remember. I digress. I wish Mac OS picked lower range ports for AirPlay and the things it needs to do the fun things it does. And I wish Flask and other servers picked a little bit more ubiquitous ports. Like I like Neo4j, weird port, 5000. Anyways, I moved it to 5001. It worked. It worked really, really well. So before we go into the GitHub Actions part, I just want to quickly show you what that looks like, right? So I'm hoping you see my screen. And you can see this is the code, and I'm running the terminal here. And you can see this is the Docker Compose up, and the command is running. I can quickly show you the Docker Compose. The web part is what you'd be interested in. And you can see it here. And you can see it. It is running the app, and it's got some environment variables passed in, and the command is running. And you can see here, Flask is running. If I go to the browser, the simple browser inside VS Code, I'm going to the root, to the home sort of my server, and it says welcome to server. If I now go into my app, into my routes, where is my routes? Routes, user root. All right. So if I go to the root here and I would say, if I go to the server version 2, and I hit save, you notice once I hit save, the server restarted. And if I go to the browser, refresh version 2, magic, software development at its best. My project is done. I'm going to go back now into the GitHub Actions piece. So now I said, all right, give me GitHub Actions. So my first prompt was create a test image to test. Did not go very smooth. I wanted to run a Docker. I wanted to run the test from Docker. So first, Python complained and says, I don't know, I don't like something. I pasted it into Aider.Chat. Aider said, okay, there was an init.py there. Let me remove it. And then when it removed it, there was another error, which was I cannot import app.py. So I took that second error, inserted again into Aider, and then Aider resolution was to recreate the init, the underscore init.py in the test folder, which put me now into the first error. So while Aider fixing errors was really good at sometimes it gets really funny. Like you get in a sort of like a funk like this. And then, okay, I have to be a developer now. I need to be an engineer at some point. And I had to go and fix it. And I just use a shell script that runs the test from the root folder. So I don't get that. I don't find app pipe. I had to understand the problem and fix it. That didn't take long. I've done that before. Now, prompting to create the GitHub Actions worked pretty smooth. And then I want to show you the GitHub Actions it created. So if I go into my commits and I can look at GitHub Actions first version. So if I go there, I don't want to go to the change. If I go to GitHub Actions first version and I want to see the repository at that point. So if I go there, you will see now I have a workflow, which is good. And I have a YAML. I like YAMLs. So it first is going to main branch, and I was working in a different branch. So keep that in the back of your head. We need to revisit that. But then it did the normal thing. Again, I think I forget my own advice. I am not specific. Like you really have to be specific, right? Like I can make a lot of, men, women conversation jokes about when you need to be specific or not, but this thing just takes it to a whole different level. It went with a complete default. So it tried to set up Python. It tried to, it is just using a Python setup. It is using GitHub Actions. It is running its Ubuntu to run Python. And it's trying to do a pip install and do all the stuff. And if you remember, I was trying to avoid that. I do not want neither the local dev machine nor my test environment to install anything, because things could get really hairy and complex if I have so many things that I need to run together. If I want to run really good checks, if I want to run synthetic tests that I trust, you remember, I'll have a talk about tests one day for sure. But if you want to run the tests that I want to run, the tests that say, if that test pass, go to production and you don't lose sleep over it. I think you need to run Docker because you need so many things configured and you may need multiple of them. So as a result, this didn't work. This is not what I wanted. I wanted to use a Docker image. Okay. So what I did, I said, okay, let me refactor. So I went and I said, change the GitHub Actions to use a starting point branch and run the test using Docker Compose. And that worked. Like, seriously, that worked really, really well. If I go back into my commits, and you can see, when I changed the branch and I said, like, I gave it the branch, and I said, use Docker Compose, you can see now it is different now. It's adding starting point, which is really good. And now it's using Docker Compose. So that was amazing. Like, I really loved it. This was fantastic. And I think I ran the actions, and maybe that will be the first action that I ran in the day 7 hours ago. And it worked, right? Like, if you go there, you can see run the test with Docker Compose step, and this is now the Docker image being built. And of course, there is like a warning here. I guess I need to fix my Docker image. Different story for a different day, but the tests passed. So that was amazing. I was excited at that point. That was like, okay, like seriously, in 1 hour, I went from nothing at all, or less than 1 hour, 45 minutes, from nothing at all into a starter kit for Python with multiple Docker image, Docker file configurations, and Docker Compose, and it's running, and GitHub Actions, and I was like, yes, AI is amazing. So now let's go and push the image into the cloud. Now I needed to get that to push into Google Cloud. Last slide. Notice the red. You see what I did there? I wrote change. I didn't write change. And the damn thing did it. That was actually quite surprising. It is almost as if it knew what I wanted to do, and it's almost closer to our brain. You know how, you know the trick where they show you text and the text is incomplete, but yet but yet you can read it because it is not really your eyes that read, it's your brain, and your brain has these things, and we never understand how they work. And I don't think we understand how the thing works either. I don't think the people who made it understand how it works still. It is still surprising. That was funny. I had to get back to that. So now, jumping back ahead, all right, I want you to create that integration. And what it did is it did something that worked, I think, that looked okay at if I look at it, like I want to show you the code at at a certain stage that it created. So if I go there and I can look at my 14 commits, um, but I want to say this is the first version, and then this was sort of like my first attempt to push. So um, let's see what the code looked like there. If I go there, I look at the workflow. It looked it looked interesting. Is there? I first thought I should use environments, so I added environments. It was trying to use the environments. It did the right things, but it didn't do them all correctly. So it used Google Auth. Okay, understood. But it used version one. I should have probably used version two, which is what I finally ended up doing. It tried to get some things from the secrets. Um, so there was something called WI, which is Work Identity Federation Provider, and you needed to get the service account email. So it tried to do things from the secrets, and then it tried to do things from the environment to build the Docker package. It needed different things. And to be honest, also in a real life situation, I feel that it will be a different repo that builds the repository, that builds the Google artifacts and the repo that when you're running the code. So there was no easy way that I can think of taking the output of my Terraform from our previous conversation and passing it, because you need some of these things to be passed, like the URL of the GitHub of the GCP repository, so artifact repository. So I did. There was a little bit of copying and pasting and trying to understand what was going on. And then when I ran it, I had an identity unauthenticated error, and Aider would not could not solve it, and I did not expect it to solve it. I pasted it just to see how confused it could get, and it gave me like a generic answer trying to help me, which was not bad. But I think bottom line is I had to debug it, and I needed to understand what was going on. So the first couple ones was this, just the secrets were not created properly. The second one was in my prompting last week or last episode for trying to create the Google artifacts. I had attribute conditions to limit which GitHub repository can use the GitHub Actions, which GitHub Actions from which GitHub repository. So I limited with the repository name, and I limited it to the organization. But I think, but somehow I went and I looked, and it was not using the repository, which is organization in GitHub. A little bit confusing. It was using Actor, and Actor was actually my GitHub name. So I had to make the change in the Terraform script, rerun the script, make sure it's working, run it again, and voila. So it worked. But the debugging of that was more than, I would say, 2 hours of frustrations. Just trying to figure out everything and going between two repos and trying to remember what I did last week. And that is starting to hit some things in my brain. I don't have a lot. I don't have the full conclusions yet. I think we're gonna do that maybe in a couple of weeks from now. But the conclusions for this week is creating starter code was easy. It's pretty fast. Dockerization time is really significantly cut. Integration is still a challenge, right? And then, like, in order for me to get to the point where I can see in my actions that I fixed this typo in secret and the test and push worked, And then I go into my repository in Google Cloud and I click on it and I see the image. Oh my God, I saw the image. And you can see 2 hours, right? 5 hours, 7 hours ago was the first attempt. 5 hours ago was when the repo was finished. The good news is, I think, I think it's also, you got to keep in mind that I am trying to do this for the first time. So I am a first time attempting person to do that. Maybe it would have taken me 2 days if I haven't used those tools. Probably would have taken me a little bit more. So not too bad, not too bad. Um, Again, I'm going to repeat what I said last week. These tools are amazing to save you time. Um, but they're definitely not if you're short in knowledge. They actually may be somehow useful in pointing you into the areas. Like every time you face an error, you really need to go and debug it and understand what's happening, and not just count too much on the tool. Uh, time will tell if this will become so good. It becomes like a compiler, and then you don't have to worry about errors, and it just is. This is just it. This is what it does. I can't tell. Like it needs some exponential improvement for in order for it to reach that stage. Uh, I don't think it will fail as much as visual programming attempts of the 90s failed. I was an early Visual H C++, Visual H for Java, and everybody was excited about connecting things. But then we realized that we can't debug them. Like if you look at something that was built by someone else and it was fairly complex, once things get complex, it was very hard to debug. And that is the thought. I cannot stop my brain from thinking about that. If I use prompting and I create a gazillion things, like 100,000 lines of code, and somebody else needs to come and maintain that, the practicalities of it. Like, how does this work day to day? Using Copilot is a different story. Using Copilot is helping you write the code, but you still write the code and you understand it and somebody else review it. This is writing almost everything, refactoring everything, fixing things. So far, you need, like I said last time, you need to really keep close eye on it. You need to treat it as an engineer who's working with you and you're doing code reviews. It's an exercise of pair programming with a really fast software engineer who's got a lot of knowledge and can search, you know, the internet much faster than you. But it's still pair programming. You need to be up there. Thank you. Next time, we'll see what we can do to create the Cloud Run artifacts, push this code into it, and test the endpoint.